Naomi's hands trembled as she turned the key to their penthouse door. She had returned earlier than expected, her heart filled with anticipation. Her arms holding a small bouquet of lilies and a neatly wrapped box. Every step down the polished hallway carried hope. Tonight she would share the joy of the doctor's words. Their baby was healthy, strong, and growing. But as she neared their bedroom, a muffled laugh broke through the silence. Naomi froze. That wasn't her voice. Her breath caught, her grip loosened, and the bouquet slipped from her fingers, scattering petals across the floor. She pushed the door open, her pulse pounding in her ears. There he was, Damien, the man she trusted, the man she had vowed her life to, lying in bed with another woman. The scene tore through her chest like glass. In that single moment, the world she had built around loyalty and sacrifice collapsed. Her lips parted, but no words came. Only the sound of betrayal filled the air. Viewers, pause for a moment. What would you do if the person you trusted most shattered that trust at your most vulnerable time? Naomi carried Damien's child, believing their bond was unbreakable. She returned home ready to share joy, but instead she faced betrayal. Ask yourself, if you were in her shoes, would you confront him on the spot? Would you walk away without a word? Or would the weight of loyalty hold you in place, torn between love and pain? This is not a story about wealth or power. It's about choices made when loyalty is broken and the strength it takes to decide what love truly means. Welcome back to Mr. Ashford's Love Stories. If you've been here before, you know this is where we share stories that challenge the heart and leave lessons for life. And if you're new, thank you for joining us today. You came at the right time. Before we dive further, I want to ask something important. Please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who values real stories, and subscribe to the channel. Your support keeps these stories alive and ensures more people get to experience them. Now, stay with me, because Naomi's journey isn't just about heartbreak, it's about what happens when trust is broken and how strength can grow from it. At first glance, Naomi's story may seem like a tale of betrayal and loss, but if you stay with me, you'll see it's much more. This isn't only about what Damien did in that bedroom. It's about the strength Naomi found in the silence that followed. You'll watch her face the darkest night of her life and still choose hope for her unborn child. You'll see how healing begins when a woman reclaims her worth. And most of all, you'll see how. Second chances sometimes arrive where you least expect them, through kindness, respect, and steady love. This story will remind you that wealth may buy comfort, but it cannot buy loyalty. And in the end, respect is what builds a family that lasts. So stay close, because what you're about to hear is not only Naomi's heartbreak, but also her awakening. It's a story that will test your emotions, make you question loyalty, and remind you of the courage it takes to walk away from what breaks you. Naomi's path will show you that true love is not about gifts or promises whispered in the dark. It's about respect, honesty, and actions that prove devotion every single day. Her choice will shape not only her future, but also the life of the child she carries. Viewers, hold on to this thought as we begin. Sometimes the greatest act of love is choosing yourself, so you can give better love to those who depend on you. Now, let's step back to where it all began. Naomi Bennett was 25, and to anyone who knew her, she carried herself with a kind of quiet grace that drew people in. She wasn't loud or commanding, yet her presence lingered long after she left a room. She had soft brown skin, eyes that carried warmth, and a smile that spoke of patience. Those who met her often said she had the rare gift of making people feel seen. Her life hadn't always been one of comfort. She grew up in a modest household in Queens, raised by parents who taught. Her, that loyalty and hard work mattered more than appearances. From her mother, Naomi learned the value of gentleness. From her father, she learned resilience. When she married Damien Caldwell, she believed she was stepping into a partnership where both qualities would be cherished. Marriage to a man like Damien came with expectations. He moved in circles filled with sharp suits, polished speeches, and constant networking. Naomi chose to adapt. She gave up the teaching career she had started building because Damien insisted she didn't need to work. At first, she told herself it was an act of love. Her sacrifice would free him to chase bigger dreams without distraction. She reasoned that the success of one was the success of both. Still, there were moments when the silence at home pressed against her. While Damien was away at meetings or travelling, Naomi found herself filling the hours alone. She learned to sew, spent evenings writing in a journal, and poured herself into small hobbies that reminded her she had a voice. But her truest hope lay in the tiny life growing inside her. Pregnancy was more than an event, it was her anchor. She dreamed of cradling her child, of building a home where love would echo through. The walls where Damien would finally pause long enough to see her again. She believed the baby would be their bridge, pulling him closer, reminding him of the vows they exchanged under the archway of roses 2 years earlier. Every time she placed her hand on her belly, Naomi whispered promises. "You will never feel invisible," she told her unborn child. "You will grow up knowing love is safe." Those promises gave her strength when the loneliness grew heavy. Damien Caldwell's name carried weight across New York's business world. At 32, he had built a reputation as one of the city's sharpest entrepreneurs. His ventures stretched from luxury real estate to tech startups, and his face often appeared in glossy magazines with headlines calling him a visionary. To the outside world, Damien was the man who had it all: wealth, influence, and a wife who seemed to embody elegance and grace. At charity galas, he spoke with polished ease, shaking hands, making deals, and leaving admirers convinced they had met someone destined to reshape industries. People applauded his confidence and envied the lifestyle he commanded. But behind the charm, there was a distance few could ignore once they got close. Damien rarely let his emotions surface. He could stand in a room full of people and still feel unreachable, his mind already racing ahead to the next deal, the next acquisition, the next climb up the ladder. Success was his obsession, and everything else seemed to orbit around it. At home, this detachment was sharper. Conversations with Naomi often drifted back to his business. She would ask how his day had been, and he would reply with figures, projections, or short answers that closed the door to anything deeper. If Naomi tried to speak about her feelings or hopes for the baby, Damien would nod politely, but his eyes often strayed to his buzzing phone. Naomi admired his ambition, but she also felt the weight of his absence, even when he was sitting beside her at dinner. He had mastered the art of presence without connection. To him, silence meant focus. To her, silence meant loneliness. Damien wasn't cruel. He never raised his voice or made a scene, yet his indifference left scars that words could never repair. He seemed to believe that providing a penthouse, private cars, and designer comforts was proof of love. In his world, affection was measured in gifts, not gestures of intimacy. Naomi longed for a different kind of love, the kind where a husband's hand lingered on her growing belly, where a late-night talk turned into laughter, where a simple "how are you feeling" carried more weight than a signed contract. But Damien's attention was elsewhere, and that elsewhere always came first. Naomi had always believed that vows meant more than words spoken on a wedding day. To her, they were promises sealed before family, friends, and God. So even when Damien's distance cut into her, She reminded herself of the day she walked down the aisle. She remembered the way her father's hand shook as he gave her away, the way Damien had looked at her, calm, confident, certain. Through better or worse, she whispered to herself on nights when the bed felt too wide. Through sickness and health, those words became her shield, her reason to stay steady when her heart longed for more connection than Damien gave. She convinced herself that marriage was never without struggle. Love wasn't a constant wave of affection, she told herself. It was endurance. If he seemed distant now, it was only because he carried the burden of building their future. One day, when the empire was secure, surely he would set his briefcase aside, turn off his phone and see her again. Her pregnancy renewed that faith. She was certain that once he held their baby, something inside him would change. She pictured Damien in the delivery room, his eyes softening, his heart breaking open at the sight of his child. That thought kept her from collapsing under the weight of his indifference. Naomi's friends sometimes questioned her silence about Damien's absence, but she smiled and defended him. "He works hard because he loves us," she would say, her voice steady though her heart trembled. To admit otherwise would feel like tearing her marriage apart with her own words, and she wasn't ready for that. For Naomi, hope was an act of loyalty. She clung to it tightly, even when cracks in her world threatened to widen. The signs had been there long before Naomi admitted them to herself. At first, she brushed them aside. Missed dinners, unanswered calls, birthdays, celebrated with Damien stepping out midway to take a meeting. Each time she told herself it was temporary, that love required patience. But as months passed, the pattern hardened. Damien's empire consumed him. Investors, clients, and endless projects left little room for a wife waiting at home. Naomi often found herself walking through the spacious penthouse alone, the silence echoing louder than any argument could. She remembered one evening when she had cooked his favourite meal. She set the table, lit candles, and even wore the blue dress he once said made her glow. Hours slipped by, and Damien never showed. A text finally buzzed her phone. Meeting ran late. Don't wait up. Naomi ate alone, staring at the empty chair across from her. That chair became a symbol she could no longer ignore. At events, she stood beside him like a polished accessory. Cameras flashed, guests complimented, and Damien's arm rested lightly on hers. To the world, they looked perfect, but Naomi could feel the distance in the way his eyes scanned the crowd rather than meeting hers. She felt invisible, swallowed by the image he worked so hard to project. What hurt most wasn't anger. It was absence of touch, of attention, of being chosen when it mattered. Damien believed he was building a legacy, but in the process, Naomi wondered if he realized he was dismantling the very home that legacy was meant to protect. And though she smiled in public, inside she carried a quiet ache, an ache that whispered a painful truth. She was married to a man who loved success more than he loved presence. When Naomi first married Damien, she imagined balancing her own ambitions with his. Teaching had been her dream since college, and for a short time she lived it, standing in front of classrooms, guiding students through lessons, watching their faces light up when understanding finally clicked. Those moments filled her with purpose. But marriage to Damien changed the path she thought she would follow. He had been firm from the start. "You don't need to work, Naomi. Focus on us, on our home. I'll provide everything." At first, the offer felt generous, even loving. To be cared for so completely seemed like proof of his devotion. So she set her career aside. One by one, she stopped meeting friends for coffee, turning down invitations because Damien's schedule demanded her presence at corporate dinners and social events. She began to trade her own independence for the image of being the perfect wife to a powerful man. Naomi told herself these sacrifices were small compared to the greater reward of building a life together. She smiled when people complimented her role as Damien's supportive partner. She learned to adjust her days around his needs, whether it meant late nights, waiting for him to return, or rearranging her priorities to fit the calendar of his business empire. But quietly, she missed her own voice. She missed the classroom chatter, the comfort of friends who once shared her secrets, and the feeling of standing on her own achievements. She wondered sometimes if she had lost too much of herself, yet she held on to the hope that her sacrifice would one day mean something, that Damien would recognize it, honor it, and love her more deeply for it. When Naomi first learned she was pregnant, her heart swelled with relief. She had longed for a sign that her marriage could still grow into the bond she had always dreamed of, and this felt like the answer. She pictured the news softening Damien's sharp edges, imagined him rushing home, earlier, asking how she felt, resting his hand on her belly with wonder. In her mind, the baby would change everything. She believed no empire, no boardroom, no contract could compete with the sight of a child who carried both their blood. Naomi told herself this child would pull them together in ways words and vows had failed to do. Every flutter she felt inside her made her whisper, "This will be what makes him stay close. This will remind him what truly matters." She began to plan small moments in her head, late nights when Damien would rock the baby so she could rest, family walks in Central Park, where they'd laugh like any ordinary couple, afternoons spent watching their child take first steps on the wide penthouse floors. Her belief wasn't blind, it was a lifeline. Without it, the silence of their marriage would feel unbearable. But with it, she convinced herself she was only a few months away from watching her husband's heart turn toward her again. Pregnancy, to Naomi, wasn't just about becoming a mother. It was about reviving her marriage, breathing life into love that felt as if it was slipping away. When Naomi's doctor suggested a wellness retreat for prenatal care, she hesitated at first. Leaving the city, leaving Damien, even for a short time, felt strange. But her health mattered now more than ever, and the doctor explained the program would help her rest, regain strength, and ease the stress that weighed on her. The retreat was nestled outside the busy heart of New York, in a calm space designed for expectant mothers. The days moved at a slower rhythm there. Mornings began with gentle stretches led by soft-spoken instructors. Afternoons offered balanced meals, naps, and conversations with other women who carried the same glow of motherhood. In the evenings, Naomi sat near the windows, journaling about her hopes for the baby. For the first time in months, she felt her shoulders loosen. Without Damien's constant calls to meetings or the empty silence of their penthouse, Naomi allowed herself to breathe. She wrote letters she never sent, one to her child, filled with promises, one to Damien, filled with reminders of why she believed they could still find their way back. The retreat gave her a glimpse of the life she wanted. She found peace in the sound of laughter from other women, some sharing stories of supportive partners waiting at home, others confessing fears that echoed her own. Naomi felt less alone, less trapped in the idea that her marriage's struggles were hers to bear in silence. Each day, as she placed her hand on her belly, she felt a quiet conviction growing inside her. The baby was thriving. She was stronger, and maybe, just maybe, this pause was what she needed to return home with a renewed spirit, ready to fight for her family. Every night at the retreat, Naomi lay awake thinking of Damien. She tried to ignore the sting of his absence and instead pictured him waiting for her return. In her heart, she clung to the belief that the man she married was still there, buried under layers of ambition and long hours. She replayed their vows in her mind, for better, for worse, in sickness and in health. Those words were not promises she intended to break. If loyalty meant staying steady when everything else wavered, then she was determined to hold on. Naomi convinced herself that her sacrifices would not go unnoticed forever. Once Damien saw their child, once he understood the weight of fatherhood, he would soften. He would set aside the phone calls, the meetings, and the boardroom battles. She imagined him looking at their baby for the first time, realizing what truly mattered and turning his attention back to her. Even when doubts crept in, she silenced them with hope. Marriage is not about leaving when it's hard, she whispered to herself. It's about believing change is possible. The retreat ended with her feeling stronger, both in body and spirit. Carrying flowers and a handmade blanket she had sewn, Naomi prepared to return home. Her heart brimmed with anticipation, certain that this moment, this surprise visit, would mark the start of a new chapter in their marriage. What she didn't know was that the loyalty she guarded so tightly was about to be tested in a way she never imagined. Naomi sat at the retreat's small writing desk, her journal open, pen resting in her hand. The doctor had encouraged her to stay a few extra days to ensure her strength held steady, but Naomi's heart tugged her homeward. She wanted to see Damien. She wanted to hand him the results of her checkup herself, the words she had longed to hear, "The baby is healthy, strong and thriving." She pictured the expression on his face when she shared the news. Maybe his eyes would soften. Maybe, for once, he would push aside his phone, take her hands and let joy rise above business. She imagined telling him about the blanket she had stitched during quiet evenings at the retreat, each thread carrying her hopes for the child they would soon hold together. The idea of surprising him filled her with excitement. She would arrive unannounced, flowers in hand, her heart ready to believe again. Perhaps the suddenness of her return would remind Damien that love needed presence, not just promises. Naomi closed her journal, smoothed her dress over her growing belly, and whispered to her child, "Let's go home to Daddy." The words steadied her, convincing her that loyalty still had meaning, that perhaps this evening would be the turning point they both needed. The ride back into the city felt longer than usual. Naomi watched the skyline draw closer, her heart lifting with every mile. The retreat's quiet still lingered in her mind, but she told herself the true peace she longed for would come from seeing her husband smile when she handed him the gifts she carried. On her lap lay a bouquet of white lilies, fresh and delicate, wrapped in soft paper, tied with a ribbon. She had chosen them because Damien once said lilies reminded him of their wedding day. To Naomi, they symbolized purity, hope, and the chance to start again. Beside the flowers sat a small box wrapped in pale cloth. Inside was the baby blanket she had stitched herself, one careful loop after another. Each night at the retreat, she worked on it, imagining the tiny hands and feet that would soon be wrapped in its warmth. To her, it wasn't simply fabric, it was a message, a reminder that she had poured her heart into building their family. As the car pulled into the penthouse garage, Naomi pressed her palm against her belly and smiled. "He'll see this and know," she whispered to her child. "He'll remember what we mean to him." She stepped out, gathering the bouquet and the small box, her steps light with hope as she entered the building. The doorman greeted her warmly, surprised to see her earlier than expected. Naomi returned the smile, her excitement too strong to hide. She walked to the elevator, her pulse quickening as each floor passed. In her hands were symbols of love. In her heart a belief that tonight would bring change. The elevator doors opened to the private hallway that led straight to their penthouse. Naomi stepped out, her heels clicking softly against the polished floor. The air smelled faintly of the lavender she always kept in the foyer, but the atmosphere carried an emptiness she hadn't expected. Unlocking the door, she pushed it open with care, almost hesitant, though she couldn't explain why. The space inside greeted her with silence. No music, no television humming in the background, no sound of Damien's deep voice on the phone. For a moment she smiled. Maybe he stepped away for a shower, she thought. The thought of surprising him, of placing the flowers on the counter and presenting the blanket like a secret gift, made her pulse quicken with excitement. She set the bouquet carefully on a nearby table and adjusted the box in her hand. But then, as she walked farther inside, she caught it. Soft, muffled sounds from down the hallway. At first it was unclear, a laugh, low and unfamiliar. Naomi froze. Her brows furrowed. The penthouse was supposed to be empty, except for Damien. She strained to listen. The sound carried again, this time followed by the faint creak of movement, then whispers blending into laughter. A knot formed in her stomach, tight and sudden. Her steps slowed. Each footfall felt heavier, the air pressing against her chest. Naomi's mind tried to reason. Perhaps Damien had a meeting at home. Perhaps someone from work had stopped by. But no meeting sounded like that. Soft, intimate, careless. Her fingers gripped the edge of the blanket box, her knuckles turning pale. The hallway stretched before her, long and still, leading her toward the closed bedroom door. Behind it, the muffled voices continued, drawing her closer with every unsteady step. Naomi's hand trembled as she reached the end of the hallway. The muffled laughter grew clearer now, paired with hushed voices that sent a chill racing through her body. Her breath came shallow. Her heartbeat, loud enough she feared it might give her away. She pressed her palm against the door, hesitating. Part of her wanted to turn back, to leave the sounds behind, to protect herself from whatever truth lay inside. But the stronger part of her, the part carrying hope, loyalty, and the life growing inside her, needed to know. With a slow push, the door creaked open. The sight before her shattered everything she had clung to. Damien lay in their bed, the same bed where she had whispered her dreams of family, the same bed where she had prayed their child would one day be cradled between them. He wasn't alone. A woman lay across his chest, her laughter spilling into the room as though Naomi's vows, her sacrifices, her presence had never mattered. The flowers Naomi carried earlier slipped from her grasp, scattering across the floor in silence. The box with the baby blanket wobbled in her hand before sliding to the ground, the fabric peeking out like a cruel reminder of what she had believed would bring them together. Damien's head turned, his eyes widened, shock freezing him in place. The woman beside him scrambled, pulling the sheets around her, but Naomi saw nothing beyond the betrayal that stared back at her. For a moment, the room felt hollow. Words deserted her. It wasn't rage that took her first. It was heartbreak so heavy it left her throat dry and her body numb. She had come home carrying hope, only to find her trust crushed in the space of a breath. Naomi staggered back, her hand flying to her stomach as though shielding the child within from the weight of what she had seen. Her breath came uneven, sharp, every inhale fighting against the tightness in her chest. The laughter, the whispers, all of it still rang in her ears, louder than the silence that followed. Damien sat up quickly, his face pale, his mouth opening to form excuses that Naomi could not bear to hear. "Naomi, wait. This isn't what it looks like." His words sounded hollow, crashing against the wall of betrayal already surrounding her. Her eyes blurred with tears. She shook her head, unable to speak. She had imagined so many versions of their reunion, warm embraces, whispered thank yous for her sacrifices, joy at the child they would soon welcome. But none of those visions survived the reality before her. The lilies lay scattered at her feet, petals torn across the polished floor. The baby blanket she had made with such care lay exposed in its box, its soft threads mocking the trust she had sewn into every stitch. Naomi's knees wobbled, but she forced herself to stand tall, her silence speaking louder than Damien's desperate attempts. Without another word, she turned and walked away. Each step down the hallway felt heavier, but also certain. There was no returning to the woman who had entered with hope in her hands. She stepped back into the cold night, tears streaking her face, the city lights blurring before her eyes. On the sidewalk outside the penthouse, Naomi wrapped her arms around her belly and whispered, "You deserve better." "We both do." The betrayal cut deep, but in that pain, a truth had been born. Love without loyalty was no love at all. And from that night forward, nothing between them would ever be the same. Naomi didn't remember how her feet carried her out of the bedroom. One moment she was staring at the bed that had once been sacred to her marriage, and the next she was stumbling through the hallway, the sound of Damien's voice chasing after her. His hurried footsteps echoed behind her, but she couldn't stop, couldn't look back. She reached the elevator, her vision clouded with tears, pressing the button with trembling hands. The doors slid open just as Damien called her name, but she stepped inside without turning. The doors closed between them, a wall stronger than any words he could throw at her. When she emerged onto the street, the city greeted her with its sharp chill. The wind tugged at her coat, her hair clinging damp against her cheeks where tears had fallen freely. She walked with no clear destination, only the need to escape the suffocating walls of betrayal. New York was alive around her, cars rushing by, people laughing in groups, strangers brushing past, but Naomi felt as though she were moving through another world entirely. The flowers, the blanket, the hope she had carried only hours ago, they were gone, left behind in the wreckage of a marriage that had collapsed in one breath. Her pace quickened as though distance might ease the ache in her chest. Her hand instinctively pressed against her stomach, grounding her in the truth that even as her world fell apart, life inside her continued to grow. Naomi slowed her steps, her breath uneven as she reached a quieter street. Streetlights glowed above her, casting soft circles of light that guided her forward. She stopped beneath one, resting a hand firmly over her belly, holding on to the only anchor she had left. Her tears blurred the world, but her voice came steady, soft and certain as she whispered to the child growing inside her. "You deserve better than this," she said, her palm pressing gently over the tiny heartbeat she couldn't yet feel but knew was there. "You deserve a father who honors his vows and a home built on love, not lies." The words spilled out of her like prayers. She promised her unborn baby that she would not let betrayal define their future. Whatever pain she carried now, she would not pass it on. Naomi thought of the blanket she had made with such care, now lying on the cold floor of the penthouse. To her, it had symbolized unity, but tonight it had become a reminder that love couldn't be forced through gifts or gestures when trust was broken. Yet even in that shattered image, she found a new meaning. The blanket, like her child, had been crafted with patience, care, and hope. She realized those qualities belonged to her, not Damien. She drew in a sharp breath and whispered again, more firmly this time, "You will know safety. You will know love that doesn't break in the dark. I will make sure of it." Her words sealed a vow stronger than the one Damien had failed to keep. It was the vow of a mother who had been broken, but not destroyed. Naomi walked for blocks before the weight in her chest forced her to stop. Her feet ached, her body tired, and the baby inside her deserved rest. The bright lights of a modest roadside motel caught her eye. It wasn't the kind of place she had ever imagined herself staying, but Tonight it offered something she craved more than comfort: distance. She stepped inside, the faint hum of an old ceiling fan filling the small lobby. The clerk barely looked up as she handed over her card, her trembling hands betraying the storm inside her. Moments later, she unlocked the door to a plain room with faded curtains, a squeaky bed, and walls that smelled faintly of disinfectant. Naomi set her bag down and sat heavily on the edge of the bed. For a long time, she stared at her reflection in the small mirror across the room. The woman looking back at her no longer seemed like the same person who had left the retreat filled with hope. Her eyes were red, her hair tangled by the wind, her cheeks streaked with tears. The silence pressed against her. In that silence, memories flooded in. Nights she had stayed awake, waiting. For Damien, dinners eaten alone, birthdays celebrated with only a text. She remembered giving up her teaching career, friendships that had faded, because she always said maybe next time when they asked to meet. She had poured everything into her marriage, and tonight she saw how little it had meant to the man she gave it to. Her hand drifted again to her stomach. She thought of the vows she once defended, the loyalty she believed in, and the sacrifices she made. All of it felt heavy now, like chains she had willingly wrapped around herself. Damien had broken those vows without hesitation, and she was left to carry the cost. Naomi lay back on the bed, tears slipping into her hair as she whispered, "Into the stillness I gave everything, and it was never enough for him." The motel walls did not answer, but her child's steady presence within reminded her she was not entirely alone. Naomi lay in the dim motel room, her hand resting over her belly, her thoughts too heavy to silence. She had sacrificed her career, her friendships, her sense of self, all because she believed love meant holding on no matter what. But tonight proved that loyalty without respect was nothing more than a cage. Viewers, I want to pause here and ask you, if you stood where Naomi stands tonight, what would you do? Would you stay, hoping loyalty could rebuild what betrayal destroyed? Or would you walk away, protecting your heart and the child who deserves a home built on trust? Think about it. Naomi's story is not just about one broken marriage. It's about choices we all face when love no longer honors us. Type your answer in the comments. Tell us, would you stay or would you walk away if loyalty was broken this way? And while you reflect, don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe so you never miss stories like this, stories that touch the heart and teach the lessons we often forget. 2 days passed since Naomi fled the penthouse, and though she tried to stay hidden within the quiet walls of the motel, her phone buzzed with unanswered messages from Damien. She couldn't bring herself to read them, but there was one name in her contacts that drew her eye: Marcus Hayes. Marcus had been her friend long before she became Mrs. Caldwell. They met in college, both studying late nights at the library, sharing coffee and laughter over heavy textbooks. While Naomi pursued education, Marcus went on to law school, eventually becoming a respected legal advisor in the city. Their paths diverged, but the bond they shared remained intact even. After marriage placed her in Damien's world of wealth and distance. When Naomi married, Marcus stepped back out of respect, yet he had always been a quiet presence, sending birthday texts, asking about her parents, checking in during holidays. He never overstepped, but he never disappeared completely either. Now, sitting alone in a modest motel room, Naomi scrolled to his name. Her finger hovered, hesitant. She hadn't wanted to involve anyone in her pain, least of all Marcus, who had always looked at her with quiet admiration. But the ache in her chest, the need for someone who would listen without judgment, pushed her to press the call button. The phone rang once, twice, and then his steady voice came through. Naomi, hearing her name spoken with such calm and care, unravelled the silence she had been carrying. She didn't speak at first. Her breath hitched. But Marcus waited, patient, until finally she whispered, "I need someone I can trust." Within an hour, he was there, standing in the doorway of the motel, dressed simply in a navy sweater and dark slacks. Marcus looked nothing like the polished attorneys she saw in Damien's circles. His expression was not one of pity, but of quiet strength, as though saying without words, "You are not alone anymore." Naomi hadn't planned to cry, but the moment Marcus stepped into the room, her composure dissolved. She tried to explain, stumbling over words, but the tears came faster than sentences. She turned her face away, ashamed of how broken she sounded. Marcus didn't rush her. He set his coat on the chair, sat across from her, and waited. His silence wasn't heavy. It was patient, creating space for her to breathe. When her sobs eased, he finally spoke, his voice low and steady. "You don't have to explain everything right now," he said. "I'm here to listen. That's enough." The gentleness of his words loosened the knot in her chest. Slowly, Naomi told him everything, how she had given up her career, how she clung to her vows, how she believed the baby would bring Damien closer. She described the night she returned home, the laughter, the betrayal, the way the lilies slipped from her hands. Her voice trembled, but she didn't stop. Marcus didn't interrupt. He didn't offer excuses for Damien or platitudes that would diminish her pain. Instead, when she finally fell silent, he leaned forward, his eyes holding hers with calm certainty. "Naomi," he said softly, "you've given more than anyone should have to. Sacrificing your career, your friendships, your peace. That doesn't mean you failed. It means you loved with everything you had. But love that demands silence and sacrifice without respect isn't love. You deserve better." The words landed heavy, yet healing. For months, Naomi had silenced her doubts by repeating vows in her mind, convincing herself loyalty meant enduring loneliness. But hearing Marcus affirm her worth cracked something open. She wasn't weak for leaving that penthouse. She wasn't foolish for expecting loyalty. She was simply a woman who had trusted the wrong man to honor her heart. Tears filled her eyes again, but this time they carried release, not shame. The room settled into silence after Naomi's tears faded. She sat back against the bed's headboard, exhausted yet lighter, as though, speaking the truth, had eased a weight she had carried for too long. Marcus remained across from her, his posture relaxed but his eyes unwavering, steady as an anchor. When Naomi shifted, her hands fell into her lap, fingers twisting together. Marcus noticed, and without hesitation he reached across the small space between them and placed his hand over hers. The touch was firm but gentle, grounding her in a way she hadn't felt in years. Naomi's breath caught. She didn't pull away, though 1,000 thoughts rushed through her. Her vows, her pain, the child she carried. Still, the warmth of his palm settled her shaking, and for the first time since leaving the penthouse, she felt safe. "You're stronger than you think," Marcus said, his voice calm, deliberate. "You don't need to carry this alone anymore. Not tonight, not ever again." The way he spoke, slow, intentional, as though each word had been chosen to steady her, sent something unfamiliar through Naomi's chest. It wasn't the rush of infatuation, it was deeper, like a reminder that she was still a woman worthy of gentleness, not just a wife bound to sacrifice. Their hands lingered together longer than necessary. Naomi finally withdrew, her cheeks flushed, her mind conflicted. But the comfort of that moment, brief as it was, left an impression she couldn't dismiss. When Marcus's hand slipped away, Naomi folded her arms around herself as though shielding her heart. The warmth of his touch still lingered, and that unsettled her. She had made vows, and even though Damien had broken his, she felt bound to them. To let herself lean too far toward Marcus felt like betraying her own promises. "I don't know what to do," she whispered, her voice barely steady. "I stood before God and promised to stay. How can I walk away now, even after what he's done?" Marcus didn't argue. He leaned back in his chair, his expression calm, his voice even. "You don't have to decide everything tonight. You're allowed to feel torn. You're allowed to want peace. That doesn't make you faithless. It makes you human." His words soothed the storm inside her. For months, she had silenced herself, afraid to admit how unhappy she had become. Damien demanded loyalty without ever offering presents. Yet here was Marcus, reminding her she still had the right to want more, to want respect, to want love that wasn't conditional. Naomi drew in a shaky breath. She resisted the pull of the quiet spark between them, but she couldn't deny the comfort Marcus gave her. His presence didn't feel like temptation, it felt like rest. That night, as they spoke of old memories from college and laughed softly at stories long forgotten, Naomi realized she hadn't smiled in weeks. And though she told herself she must guard her heart, she couldn't ignore. The way Marcus's steady presence eased her pain in ways Damien never had. As the night stretched on, the heaviness in Naomi's chest began to loosen. Marcus didn't push, didn't pry. He simply stayed, listening when she needed to speak and offering silence when her words faltered. That balance felt new to her. With Damien, silence had always meant distance. With Marcus, silence meant safety. At one point, Naomi leaned back against the pillows, her hand resting gently on her belly. Marcus noticed the gesture and, with quiet hesitation, asked, "How's the baby doing?" Her eyes softened. "Healthy," she whispered. "Stronger than I expected. The doctor said everything looks good." Marcus's lips curved in a small smile. "Then that child already takes after you?" Naomi felt her throat tighten at his words. She hadn't realized how much she needed to hear affirmation that her strength mattered. For so long, her sacrifices had been invisible. Now, sitting across from someone who saw her, she felt acknowledged in a way Damien had never given her. Their conversation lingered into the early hours. When she finally closed her eyes, exhausted, Marcus draped the motel blanket over her shoulders. He didn't linger, didn't take advantage of the fragile space she was in. Instead, he whispered, "You're not alone anymore," before settling into the chair beside her. Naomi drifted into sleep, with those words circling her heart. She knew she wasn't ready to give herself to anyone, not while the wounds of betrayal were still raw. But she also knew that something had shifted. A seed had been planted that night, fragile yet undeniable. It was the beginning of a bond built not on wealth, not on appearances, but on respect and care. She didn't know where it would lead, but for the first time in weeks, Naomi dared to believe that her future could hold more than pain. It didn't take long for Damien to find out where Naomi was staying. His network of assistants, drivers, and acquaintances always kept him informed. Within days, bouquets of roses arrived at the motel, so large they nearly blocked the narrow doorway. Expensive chocolates followed, then designer clothing in neatly wrapped boxes. The desk clerk even whispered to Naomi that a sleek car had pulled up earlier, the driver leaving behind yet another gift bag with Damien's name on the card. Each delivery came with notes written in his sharp handwriting. "I'm sorry. Come home. Let's fix this. Think of the baby. Think of us." One evening, Naomi returned from a short walk to find a velvet box waiting on the motel's small desk. Inside sparkled a diamond bracelet, so bright it caught the light even in the dim room. Her breath caught, not from awe but from the hollowness it carried. She ran her fingers over the stones and felt nothing but distance. Damien had always believed money could mend cracks, that glitter could cover wounds. But as Naomi stared at the bracelet, Her heart didn't stir. It was heavy, lifeless, nothing like the handmade blanket she had sewn with her own hands. When Damien himself appeared outside the motel, dressed in an immaculate suit, his expression carried the same practice charm she had seen at galas and boardrooms. He held out another gift, a necklace this time, as though it were proof of his love. "Naomi," he said, his voice smooth, "I've made mistakes, but I can give you everything you've ever dreamed of. Just come back." The gifts piled higher, yet none of them touched the ache in her heart. Damien returned the next evening, this time without gifts in his hands, but with urgency in his voice. He knocked at the motel door until Naomi opened it halfway, her posture tense, her belly visible beneath her loose sweater. His eyes darted to her stomach first, then to her face. "Naomi, please, don't do this to us. Don't do this to me." His words felt less like an apology and more like a plea to protect himself. He paced the small entryway, running a hand through his hair, his polished shoes tapping against the worn carpet. "People are already asking questions," he admitted, his tone sharp with unease. "The press, the board members, they've noticed you're gone. If this gets out, it'll ruin everything I've built." Naomi's chest tightened, not from longing but from clarity. He wasn't speaking about her pain, or about the child who would one day ask why their father wasn't present. He was speaking about his image. "I didn't leave because of the press," she said quietly. "I left because of you." Damien stepped closer, his voice rising. "I slipped, Naomi. It was one mistake. Don't throw away our marriage over something that can be forgotten." Her hands clenched at her sides. Forgotten. That was the word he chose, as though betrayal was something she could tuck into a drawer like one of his cufflinks. "Do you hear yourself?" she asked, her voice breaking. "You're worried about your reputation, not about the vows you shattered. You're asking me to protect your empire, not my heart." His silence then spoke louder than any gift he had sent. Naomi sat on the edge of the motel bed while Damien stood across the room, his polished image at odds with the faded wallpaper behind him. He spoke with the same confidence he used in boardrooms, layering words like armor, promising change, vowing to be better. But Naomi's ears no longer clung to the surface of what he said. She watched his face, the way his jaw tightened when she mentioned her pain, the way his eyes flickered with frustration whenever she questioned his sincerity. It struck her then. This wasn't about love. It was about control. Damien wanted her back because her absence exposed the cracks in his carefully curated life. Her gaze fell to the bracelet, glimmering on the table, the roses beginning to wilt in their vase. They were beautiful, but they meant nothing. Gifts couldn't erase the image of another woman, tangled in their sheets. Jewels couldn't rewrite the vows she whispered to herself at night to keep believing. Naomi lifted her eyes and spoke with a strength that surprised even her. "You don't understand, Damien. I don't want your diamonds. I don't want apologies spoken like rehearsed lines. I want respect. I want presence. And you can't buy either." For a moment his mask slipped. His confident expression faltered, replaced by a flash of irritation. But he quickly covered it with a polished smile, as though she hadn't noticed. Yet Naomi had. For the first time in their marriage, she saw him clearly, not as the charming entrepreneur the world admired, but as a man unwilling to give what mattered most. The realization didn't fill her with rage. It filled her with clarity. Damien's wealth could fill rooms with beauty, but it couldn't fill the emptiness he left in her heart. After Damien left the motel that night, the room fell silent again. The scent of roses lingered, the bracelet sparkled faintly under the lamp, and yet none of it touched Naomi's heart. Instead, a different memory came to her, the way Marcus had sat across from her days earlier, saying, nothing until she was ready to speak, offering nothing but presence when her world was collapsing. The contrast couldn't have been sharper. Damien arrived with cars, flowers and diamonds. Marcus had arrived with nothing but steady eyes and quiet words. One man fought to preserve an image. The other sought only to remind her she mattered. Naomi thought about how Damien's apologies always circled back to himself, his reputation, his empire, his loss. Marcus, on the other hand, spoke of her strength, her worth, her right to peace. Damien's hands delivered gifts, heavy with meaning he hoped she would assign to them. Marcus's hand had rested gently over hers, not demanding, not pressing, but steady enough to calm her shaking. As Naomi traced her fingers over her belly, she understood the truth. Wealth without respect was hollow, but kindness, simple, unpolished, consistent, was worth more than any jewel. She wasn't ready to make choices yet, but she knew this. Damien's empire had built walls between them, while Marcus's presence had built a bridge back to herself. That realization planted something new in Naomi's heart, a clarity that the future she wanted for her child could never be bought. It had to be lived, day by day, with love that showed up in actions, not gifts. The days after Damien's empty apologies felt heavy at first, but Naomi slowly began to notice something different rising within her. It wasn't rage. It wasn't despair. It was a quiet, steady resolve that had been buried beneath years of sacrifice. For the first time, she looked at her reflection in the motel's small mirror and didn't see a woman defined only as someone's wife. She saw herself, Naomi Bennett, still standing, still breathing, still capable of more than pain. Each morning she made her bed neatly, opened the curtains to let in light, and whispered to her unborn child, "We're going to be all right." Saying those words wasn't simply for the baby, it was for her too. Every repetition added another layer of strength to her spirit. She began to hold her shoulders higher, to walk with her chin lifted even when doubt crept in. The memory of betrayal no longer crushed her. It fueled her determination to create a future where she was not invisible. Reclaiming her strength didn't come in one dramatic moment. It came in small choices, eating well despite the ache in her heart, getting fresh air instead of hiding indoors, and reminding herself that loyalty meant nothing if it erased her identity. Naomi had once thought strength meant staying silent and enduring. Now she understood that strength meant choosing a path that honored her worth. With her strength slowly returning, Naomi began to think about the life she had once wanted before Damien's world consumed hers. Back then, she dreamed of finishing her degree, standing in front of classrooms again, and shaping young minds. That dream had felt distant once she gave it up, but now the thought of reclaiming it filled her with possibility. At night, she sat with her notebook, sketching out plans in neat handwriting. She listed the courses she still needed to complete, the time it might take, after the baby was born, and how she could balance motherhood with study. For the first time in years, she imagined a future that belonged to her. But her thoughts didn't stop there. As she flipped through her notes, she began sketching another idea, a small venture designed for mothers like her, women who needed a supportive space while raising children. She pictured workshops, community meetups, and resources that would help women build strength and independence. It wasn't about wealth or prestige. It was about creating something meaningful, something that could grow alongside her child. The thought stirred excitement inside her. For so long, she had equated her worth with Damien's approval. Now she realized her dreams didn't need his permission to exist. She had the mind, the skills, and most importantly, the heart to make something of her own. She looked at her growing belly and whispered, One day you'll see your mother building something with her own hands, and you'll know that love and independence can live together." That vision of independence became a light she chased every day. The nights at the motel took on a rhythm of their own. After dinner, Naomi would sit by the small desk with her journal open, pen moving across the pages. She wrote down everything she couldn't always say aloud: her fears, her hopes, her determination to give her child a safe home. The pages filled quickly, each entry ending with a promise: "You will know love that doesn't break." Sometimes, when her hand grew tired, she closed her eyes and prayed. She prayed for strength to endure the months ahead, for clarity in the choices she would need to make, and for courage to let go of the man who had failed her vows. The prayers weren't desperate anymore. They were steady, like conversations with a God she trusted to guide her footsteps. Bonding with her baby became the highlight of those nights. Naomi would lie back against the pillows, hands resting over her belly, speaking softly into the quiet. She described the world outside the window, the books she wanted to read to her child, the songs she would hum at bedtime. Sometimes she laughed at herself, realizing she was holding full conversations with someone who couldn't yet answer. But those moments reminded her she wasn't alone. The first time she felt a kick, she gasped, tears filling her eyes. It was as though her child was answering back, reminding her that life continued to grow inside her despite all the heartbreak. That single movement gave her more strength than any diamond or apology ever could. In those quiet nights, Naomi realized healing wasn't a sudden leap. It was a series of small, steady steps, and she was taking them one by one. One evening, Naomi shared her notebook with Marcus. She hadn't planned to. Those pages felt private, like fragments of her soul. But something about his presence made her feel safe enough to open up. She laid the journal on the table, the inked outlines of courses and ideas for a small venture visible across the pages. Marcus studied them quietly, his brow furrowed in concentration. When he finally looked up, there was no pity in his eyes, only pride. "This is brilliant," he said firmly, "and it's yours. You're not just surviving, Naomi, you're planning. That's strength." She laughed softly, embarrassed. "They're only notes. I don't even know where to start." Marcus leaned forward, his tone practical yet encouraging. "I do. I can help you research schools where you can finish your degree. And if you want to start this venture for mothers, I'll guide you through the legal side. Permits, funding, whatever you need. You don't have to build this alone." Naomi blinked at him, her throat tightening. For years, Damien had spoken in absolutes. What she should or shouldn't do, what was worth his time, what wasn't. But Marcus didn't dictate. He offered. He placed her dreams at the centre and asked how he could support them. It wasn't grand gestures. It wasn't diamonds or roses. It was practical steps, offered with sincerity, grounded in respect. And for Naomi, that meant more than anything Damien had given her in years. She closed her journal, pressing it to her chest. "Thank you," she whispered, "for seeing me." Marcus's reply was simple, but it carried weight. "You've always been worth seeing." Naomi woke the next morning with a different kind of strength. The pain of betrayal was still there, but it no longer defined her. She moved with purpose, her heart focused not on what she had lost, but on what she could still build. She spent her days sketching timelines, writing out lists of classes, and dreaming of her venture. Each small step was a declaration. She was more than the woman who had been betrayed. She was a mother, a dreamer, and someone who deserved a future shaped by her own choices. When doubts crept in, she thought of Marcus's steady words, "You've always been worth seeing." The memory lit a fire in her spirit. For years she had questioned her value, tying it to Damien's approval. Now she understood that her worth was not dependent on a man's recognition. It had always been hers to claim. She stood before the mirror one evening, her belly round beneath her dress, her eyes brighter than they had been in months. She whispered to her reflection, "I am enough. For me, for my child, for the life we'll live." It wasn't just a statement, it was a turning point. The woman who once waited silently at empty dinner tables was gone. In her place stood a woman who knew that love without respect was a prison, and she refused to live in chains. Empowerment, Naomi realized, didn't arrive with fanfare. It came in reclaiming her identity, in honoring her dreams, in preparing to give her baby a future built on trust and peace. And, step by step, she was ready to walk into it. The days that followed carried a quiet shift Naomi could not ignore. What began as Marcus simply being there, listening, offering steady words, slowly grew into something deeper. He was no longer just the friend who had come to her rescue, he was the presence. That made silence less heavy, meals less lonely, and her thoughts less clouded. Marcus didn't demand her time, yet he seemed to know exactly when she needed company. He stopped by after work with a calm smile, sometimes bringing takeout from her favourite cafe, other times carrying nothing but his willingness to sit and share the evening. Naomi found herself waiting for those visits, not with desperate expectation, but with a warmth that reminded her life could still hold gentle moments. She noticed how he listened, not half-heartedly, not distracted, but fully. He remembered the little things she said, even details she thought she had mumbled in passing. When she spoke about her worries, he didn't try to fix them with quick solutions. Instead, he leaned in, his eyes steady, as though telling her she mattered more than the world outside the motel walls. The more time they spent together, the more Naomi realized she was no longer carrying her pain alone. A bond was forming, unhurried yet undeniable, woven from respect, trust, and the kind of care she hadn't known in years. Naomi found herself cherishing the small routines she and Marcus built together. Nights that once felt endless now carried comfort. They would sit across from each other at the small table in the motel room, sharing simple meals, soup, sandwiches, sometimes the takeout Marcus brought. What made those meals special wasn't the food but the way Marcus looked at her as though nothing else in the world demanded his attention. Their conversations often stretched late into the night. They spoke about the past, college days filled with ambition and laughter, and the present, where Naomi was learning to rebuild herself piece by piece. Sometimes Marcus shared stories from his work as a legal advisor, moments where he fought to protect those who felt powerless. Naomi listened, realizing how naturally he carried compassion into everything he did. One evening, as they talked about the baby's arrival, Naomi paused mid-sentence, her eyes widening. She pressed her hand against her stomach, a soft gasp escaping her lips. "She's moving," she whispered, her voice trembling with wonder. Marcus leaned closer, unsure at first. Naomi took his hand and guided it gently to where the tiny kicks pulsed beneath her skin. His eyes lit with awe, his expression softening into a smile she had never seen before. "That's incredible," he said quietly, his voice filled with reverence. He kept his hand there, still, careful not to intrude, but unwilling to pull away too quickly. For Naomi, the moment was profound. Damien had never shown interest in the small details of her pregnancy, yet here was Marcus, moved by something as simple as a flutter of life. It wasn't grand gestures, it was presence, pure and genuine. That night stayed with her long after the lights went out. Naomi began to notice how natural everything felt with Marcus. There were no expectations, no unspoken demands, no pressure to prove herself. With Damien, She had always felt the need to work harder for attention, to earn even the smallest gesture of care. With Marcus, everything unfolded gently, like breathing. When she laughed, he laughed with her, not at her. When she grew quiet, he didn't push for words, he simply shared the silence, making it less heavy. Their time together never felt like filling a void. It felt like building something, steady, brick by brick, without forcing the walls to rise too quickly. What reassured Naomi most was that Marcus never tried to cross boundaries. He didn't reach for her unless she welcomed it. He didn't press her to define what was growing between them. He simply let it be, respecting her space, her pace, her healing. That respect wrapped around her like protection. It was in the little things, the way he carried her groceries without being asked, the way he checked in with a short message, "How are you feeling today?" and the way he made her believe she wasn't a burden, but someone worth caring for. Naomi realized their bond was safe because it was mutual. Neither of them was trying to control the other. They were simply meeting in the middle, finding comfort in presence. For the first time in a long time, Naomi didn't feel invisible. She felt seen. Naomi had once believed that love meant holding on, even when it hurt. She had begged silently for Damien's attention, waiting through lonely dinners, hoping that a glance, a word, or a touch would remind her she mattered. That waiting had drained her, leaving her fragile and doubting her worth. But with Marcus, there was no begging. Respect flowed naturally in every interaction. He didn't treat her loyalty as a leash. He treated it as something sacred. When she spoke, he listened fully. When she doubted herself, he reminded her of her strength. One evening, as they walked slowly back from a small diner, Naomi turned to him and said, softly, "I used to think love was about proving you wouldn't give up, no matter what. But now I see, real love doesn't make you beg. It makes you feel safe." Marcus looked at her with quiet intensity, his voice low. Love isn't about endurance, it's about choice, choosing to respect, choosing to stay present. Anything less isn't love. Naomi stopped, her hand resting on her belly, her eyes stinging with unshed tears. She had begged Damien to see her. She would never beg again. That realization settled into her heart, firm and unshakable. Love was not diamonds, apologies, or appearances. It was respect lived out every day in small, consistent ways. And for the first time she knew she deserved nothing less. As Naomi settled into this new chapter of her life, the lesson grew clear. Love that demands silence is not love, and loyalty without respect is only bondage. What Marcus offered her, steady care, patience, and respect, was proof that real love is never begged for. It is freely given, safe and mutual. Viewers, I want to pause here and ask you something important. What do you believe love should be built on? Is it loyalty, respect, patience, or something? Type your answer in the comments. I'd love to hear your perspective. And while you're there, don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who may need its message, and subscribe to the channel so you never miss the next story. Because, as Naomi's journey reminds us, love that honors you is the only love worth keeping. The morning came sooner than Naomi expected. She woke with a sharp pain rolling through her lower back, unlike anything she had felt before. At first, she thought it was exhaustion, but as the pain returned in steady waves, her breath quickened. Her hand clutched her swollen belly, and she knew this was it. The hospital staff rushed her through admission, voices firm yet reassuring as they settled her into a room. Naomi's heart pounded, not only from the contractions, but from the realization that she was about to meet the child she had been whispering promises to for months. The hours of loneliness, the betrayal, the nights of prayer, all of it carried her here, to this moment where life was about to shift forever. The contractions grew stronger, pressing tears from her eyes as she gripped the rails of the hospital bed. Sweat clung to her brow, her body trembling under the force of labour. Yet beneath the pain, there was resolve. She had carried this child through heartbreak and silence, and now she was determined to bring her into the world with strength. After what felt like endless hours, Naomi heard the cry that changed everything. A piercing, beautiful sound filled the room, silencing every fear she had carried. The nurse placed the tiny bundle in her arms, and Naomi's tears flowed freely. She looked down at her daughter, small, perfect, alive. "Isla," Naomi whispered, her lips brushing the baby's forehead. "Welcome, my love." In that moment, nothing else mattered. Not Damien's betrayal, not the pain of the past, only the warmth of her newborn daughter, nestled against her chest, her tiny fists curling as though clinging to her mother's promises. From the moment Naomi called him, Marcus didn't hesitate. He arrived at the hospital quickly, his calm presence steadying her as she struggled through the waves of pain. Where others might have panicked, Marcus remained composed. He held her hand firmly, letting her squeeze through each contraction, whispering words that gave her courage when her strength faltered. "You're doing this, Naomi," he said gently, leaning close so she could hear him over her own cries. "Every breath brings you closer. You're stronger than you believe." When fear surged, when her body felt like it was breaking under the weight of labour, Naomi found herself focusing on his voice. The rhythm of his reassurance steadied her. His hand never left hers, his presence never wavered. He wiped her brow with a cool cloth, adjusted her pillows when she shifted, and reminded her to breathe when she felt overwhelmed. Hours stretched on, but Marcus stayed rooted, as if the world outside the delivery room didn't exist. His loyalty wasn't loud. It was quiet, consistent, unwavering. And as Naomi pushed through the hardest moments of her life, she realized something profound. This was what true support looked like. Not grand gestures or expensive gifts, but presence in the rawest, most vulnerable moments. When Isla finally came into the world, Marcus's eyes shone with tears he didn't try to hide. He wasn't her child's father, yet he looked at Naomi and Isla with the kind of reverence that came from respect and care. Naomi clutched her daughter close, her body exhausted, her spirit overflowing. She looked up at Marcus, whispering, "Thank you for being here." Marcus squeezed her hand, his voice low and steady. "There's nowhere else I'd rather be." The peace in the hospital room didn't last long. Hours after Isla's birth, while Naomi rested with her daughter nestled against her chest, the door burst open. Damien strode in, his suit immaculate as always, though his eyes carried a frantic edge. "Naomi," he said, his voice sharp with urgency, "I came as soon as I heard." His gaze shifted instantly to the newborn in her arms. He stepped closer, his hand reaching out, as though fatherhood could be claimed simply by proximity. "That's my daughter." Naomi stiffened. She adjusted Isla protectively in her arms, her body instinctively shielding the tiny bundle. The warmth of the moment dimmed under the weight of Damien's presence. He moved closer, his tone softer but still laced with desperation. "Naomi, let me hold her. I know I made mistakes, but this child, she's mine. I want to be part of her life. I need this." Those words cut through Naomi. "I need this." They weren't about Isla, not about her well-being, but about Damien himself. His need for control, his need to protect his image, his need to claim something that required more than biology. Marcus, who had remained quiet until now, stepped to Naomi's side, his posture calm but firm. His presence alone reminded Damien that Naomi wasn't alone anymore. Naomi met Damien's gaze, her voice steady despite the exhaustion in her body. "She is not yours to claim with words, Damien. She is mine to protect." and I will decide what's best for her." Damien's jaw tightened, his polished confidence faltering under the weight of her resolve. For the first time, Naomi felt the power shift. Damien's eyes flicked between Naomi and the baby, his polished mask slipping under the weight of rejection. "Naomi, don't do this," he said, his voice rising. "I am her father. Nothing changes that. I deserve to be part of her life." Naomi adjusted Isla in her arms, her exhaustion replaced by a quiet fire. "Fatherhood is not a title you demand," she said firmly. "It is earned through loyalty, through presence, through respect, none of which you gave me and none of which you've shown her." Damien's face darkened. "You can't erase me." "I'm not trying to erase you," Naomi replied, her tone calm but sharp. "I'm protecting my daughter from the cycle of neglect and betrayal you've already proven you're willing to live in. Biology does not make you a father. Loyalty does. Love does. And those are choices you refused to make when you had the chance." The words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. Damien, so used to winning battles with contracts and charm, found himself powerless here. For the first time, Naomi wasn't pleading, wasn't silent, wasn't bending to his control. She was standing tall, her voice carrying more weight than any jewel or gift he had thrown at her. Isla stirred softly in Naomi's arms, her tiny hand curling against her mother's chest. Naomi looked down at her daughter, then back at Damien. "She will grow up knowing love that is steady and safe. That's my promise to her, and it will not be compromised." Damien's jaw clenched, but no words came. In the silence, Naomi's resolve filled the room. As Damien stood in silence, frustrated but unable to push further, Marcus stepped closer, not with anger, not with bravado, but with quiet certainty. He adjusted the blanket around Naomi's shoulders, checked that Isla was resting comfortably, and then placed a glass of water within her reach. Small gestures, yet each one carried the weight of care Damien had never offered. Naomi felt the difference instantly. Damien filled rooms with noise and demands. Marcus filled them with presence. He didn't speak over her, didn't try to control the moment. He simply stood at her side, steady, reminding her without words that she wasn't alone. When Isla fussed softly, Marcus reached out, not to take her, but to gently stroke her tiny hand with one finger. "She's perfect," he said, his voice quiet with reverence. Naomi saw the honesty in his eyes. This was not about possession. It was about respect for the life she had carried and the strength it took to bring her into the world. Damien finally broke the silence, his frustration spilling into a clipped sigh. "This isn't over," but the words sounded weak against the reality before him. Naomi didn't flinch. She didn't beg. She didn't waver. She leaned against her pillows, Isla safe in her arms, Marcus steady beside her, and spoke with calm finality. "No, Damien, it is over. What matters now is Isla, and she will only know love that is real." Damien left with nothing more than the sound of the hospital door clicking shut behind him. Naomi exhaled deeply, her body sagging with relief. Marcus sat quietly in the chair next to her bed, not needing to say much more. His actions had already proven the truth. Love isn't shown in diamonds, apologies, or titles. It is lived in quiet moments of loyalty, protection, and care. And as Naomi looked from her daughter to Marcus, she felt the certainty that the life ahead, though uncertain, would be built on the kind of love she had always deserved. Weeks passed after Isla's birth, and Naomi found herself stepping into motherhood with both exhaustion and joy. Sleepless nights and endless feedings weighed on her body, but the sight of Isla's tiny face each morning reminded her that everything had changed for the better. What once felt like the end of her world had become the beginning of a new one. Marcus remained by her side, steady as always. He didn't intrude or try to define their relationship too quickly. Instead, he showed up in ways that mattered most, driving her to appointments, cooking simple meals when she was too tired, rocking Isla in the quiet hours so Naomi could rest. His presence was consistent, honest, and without hidden agendas. Naomi realized that peace wasn't something Damien could have ever given her. His love had been conditional, wrapped in appearances and demands. With Marcus, peace came naturally. She didn't need to earn it, didn't need to beg for it. It simply existed in the way he respected her and honoured her choices. One evening, as Ela slept in her crib, Naomi sat with Marcus on the small couch in her new apartment, a space she had chosen for herself, away from the shadow of Damien's empire. The air was quiet, filled only with the soft hum of the city outside. "I don't know what the future will hold," Naomi admitted, her voice calm, "but I do know I want it to be honest. No lies, no pretending, just truth." Marcus nodded, his gaze steady. "That's all I've ever wanted for you." In that moment, Naomi made her choice, not through grand declarations, but through quiet certainty. She chose peace over chaos, honesty over illusion, and Marcus over the man who had broken her trust. It wasn't about replacing one man with another. It was about building a future where love was rooted in respect, not appearances. Damien tried at first to push his way back into Naomi's life. He called, he sent more flowers, and even had his assistants draft long letters filled with promises of change. But Naomi didn't respond. Each attempt felt more like a performance than an expression of love, and she no longer had patience for rehearsed lines. Soon his visits became less frequent. The shine of fatherhood wore off when he realized Naomi would not bend to his conditions. He attended a few board meetings, subtly dropping the news of his child, using it as a way to polish his image. To him, Isla became another symbol of status, something to mention, in passing to investors who smiled politely and congratulated him. But outside of those polished rooms, Damien was absent. He never came to rock Isla to sleep. He never stood awake through midnight cries. He never learned the rhythm of her breathing when she finally settled in Naomi's arms. His presence was reduced to shadows, his empire remained his first love, and family trailed far behind. Naomi saw it clearly. For all his wealth, Damien's heart was empty of the one thing a child needed most: consistency. And as she watched him fade further from her world, she felt no bitterness, only clarity. His absence was not a loss. It was freedom. The man who once held her in a gilded cage had now slipped into the background of her life, a figure remembered only as the reminder of what she would never accept again. In the weeks that followed, Naomi often found herself journaling while Isla slept beside her. The quiet hours gave her time to reflect, not on what she had lost, but on what she had gained through the pain. The first lesson she wrote down was clear: respect is the foundation of love. Without it, everything else crumbles. She had mistaken loyalty for strength, but loyalty without respect had only drained her. With Marcus, she saw how respect lifted her instead of breaking her down. The second lesson came as she thought of Damien's endless gifts. She smiled bitterly as she remembered the diamond bracelet tucked away in a drawer, untouched. Betrayal cannot be erased by gifts. Jewelry and roses were empty when the heart behind them was unfaithful. She promised herself she would never again let shiny distractions blind her to the truth. Finally, as she rocked Isla to sleep one night, Naomi held her daughter close and whispered the third lesson: children thrive in safe and honest environments. She wanted Isla to grow up surrounded by stability, where words matched actions and love didn't come with conditions. She wanted her daughter to know that home was not about wealth, but about trust. Writing those lessons down felt like sealing them in her heart. They were not simply reminders for her, they were promises for her future and for the little girl she had vowed to protect. Late one evening, Naomi sat by the crib, watching Isla sleep. The soft rise and fall of her daughter's chest, the tiny fist curled beside her cheek, filled the room with peace. For a long time, Naomi simply watched, her heart swelling with a love she had never known before. She reached down and brushed a fingertip over Isla's small hand. "You'll never have to question what love looks like," she whispered. "Not while I'm here." Naomi's voice grew steadier as she spoke her vow aloud. "You'll grow up in a home built on truth, not appearances. You'll know that respect is not optional. It's the root of every bond worth keeping. And you'll see that integrity is not just a word, but a life I'll live in front of you." Her eyes softened, but her resolve was firm. She was no longer the woman clinging to vows broken by betrayal. She was a mother, forging a new path, one where her daughter would inherit not riches, but values that could never be bought. Naomi leaned closer, pressing a kiss to Isla's forehead. "I promise you a life where love means safety, honesty, and peace. That's my gift to you." And with that, the final pieces of her old life slipped away. What remained was a future defined not by Damien's shadow, but by her own light, and the family she was building with Marcus's steady presence at her side. Naomi's story closes not with wealth or status, but with peace. She chose honesty over appearances, respect over empty promises, and a future where her daughter will grow up surrounded by integrity. Viewers, now I turn the question to you. Do you believe Naomi made the right choice by choosing peace, Marcus, and a future built on respect? Type "love is respect" in the comments if you agree with Naomi's decision. Share this story with someone who needs its message, and don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel so you never miss another story that speaks to both the heart and the lessons of life. Because as Naomi's journey reminds us, true love isn't bought, it isn't begged for, and it isn't performed. True love is respect.